My daughter-in-law once told my 9-year-old grandson I wasn't real family. She had no idea I was sitting right there. And even less idea that I'd been quietly hiding $61 million for the past 4 years. That night at dinner, I finally stopped pretending, and what happened next left her gasping for air while I calmly sipped my wine. I never thought betrayal would come dressed in flip-flops and a citrus-scented candle, but there it was. I'm Mabel, 72, and I was parked on the porch of a rented seaside cottage with a mug of tea that tasted faintly like driftwood. My grandson, Owen, 9 and all elbows, had his little model train rattling across the slats. He'd lined the track with seashells as if scallops were commuters. A gull squawked, the wind chime tattled, and then my daughter-in-law's voice floated out the screen door as neat and sharp as a receipt. She's not really family, not like us. Now, I've been called plenty of things, opinionated, a bit much, and once dangerously enthusiastic about coupons, but hearing that line aimed at me in my own son's vacation rental hit different. It was like someone put a crack in a favorite picture frame. The photo still stands, honey, but now it's got that little lightning bolt you can't unsee. I didn't march inside or make a fuss. I just watched Owen carefully back his caboose over a knot in the wood and pretended not to notice my heart doing a small, dignified wince. From the living room came Derek's voice, the human equivalent of a shrug. Corinne didn't mean it. He always says that. He says it when she accidentally forgets to add me to group photos, when my portion ends up in a scratched plastic bowl so nothing breaks, when plans get made in whispers and announced like weather, unavoidable, and somehow my fault if I bring an umbrella. Derek is a good man who wants still water. The trouble is, still water grows algae when nobody stirs it. Out on the porch, the ocean was busy minding its own business, slapping the pilings and breathing like a big creature. Paint on the railing peeled in tidy curls the color of after-dinner mints. The screen door sighed the way old things do, and someone inside uncorked something cheerful. Owen glanced up at me with that round, unbruised gaze kids have before the world starts handing them labels. Grand look. Bridge. He'd propped 2 coasters as a trestle and was inching his engine over like a circus act. He smelled like sunscreen and salt and a little bit of jelly sandwich. Steady now, I said, pinching the track in place with 2 fingers that still remember piano scales. The engine made it across and Owen did a victory wiggle that tried to be a dance and a hop at the same time. He's got my feet broad, sensible, ready to stand. I tucked a loose hair behind my ear and took another sip of tea. Inside, current syllables moved from words to weather. That breezy tone people use when they're explaining why something unkind is actually etiquette. Here's the part that might surprise you. I didn't feel tears coming. No heat behind the eyes, no shaking spoon in my saucer. I felt tidy, organized in my bones. That sentence, not really family, clicked into place like the last puzzle piece you have to twist before it lays flat. I could practically hear the cardboard settle. I set my mug down on the rail because my hands wanted to do something graceful, and if there's one thing I've learned with age, it's that you don't always get to choose what happens, but you can choose the posture you meet it with. Mine was upright, chin soft, smile present. The cottage had a bouquet of small noises, a radio from next door murmuring an old love song, floorboards offering their creaks like commentary, the kettle inside threatening to boil over and then thinking better of it. The porch smelled of salt, lemon, and whatever the last guest spilled and swore they wiped. My cardigan, blue with tiny mother-of-pearl buttons, held a faint perfume of lavender sachet and library dust. The comforting smell of things that keep their stories even when people forget them. The screen door squeaked and Derek's head appeared like a moonrise. Mom? Everything okay? Couldn't be finer, I said, the kind of fine that wears good lipstick. He searched my face the way people do when they hope you'll tell them what to think. When I didn't, he nodded, almost grateful, and let the door slide shut. I listened to it clap into the frame, the way a polite conversation ends when the check arrives. Owen tugged my sleeve. Gran, can my train pick up seashell passengers? Only if they pay in sand dollars, I told him. He giggled and said about small commerce with a seriousness that would have impressed a mayor. The sun slid left, putting a little halo on the splinters. I watched it gild the mess and I thought, well, now there it is. Words have a way of telling you who folks are, if you give them long enough to stop auditioning. I watched a gull hop sideways along the rail like it knew a secret. Maybe it did. Maybe I did too. Instead of crying, I smiled. I didn't grin like a game show winner or smirk like a teenager. I smiled the way a person smiles when a measuring cup finally shows the line you were squinting for. Because that sentence from the next room was the last piece of proof I'd been waiting for. After Walter passed, people clucked their tongues and tilted their heads in that way folks do when they've already decided your story for you. They looked at my sensible shoes, our small house near the bus depot, the second-hand sedan with a rattle in the door, and concluded, "Poor Mabel, she'll be scraping by now." Truth is, we'd always lived modestly. Walter turned wrenches on city buses for 40 years, and could tell you which driver favored the brakes too hard just by listening to the engine. I was a librarian, the kind who made kids whisper less out of fear and more out of respect because I'd sneak them extra bookmarks if they behaved. We weren't flashy, never had a boat or a timeshare or anything with granite countertops, so it made sense to outsiders that his passing would leave me with next to nothing. Instead of correcting them, I leaned into it. I recycled the same 3 cardigans until the elbows got thin. I made a big show of sighing at grocery receipts and muttering about the price of butter, like I was narrating the end of civilization. When visiting, I made sure to fuss with the air mattress that leaked just enough to leave me on the floor by morning. Corinne, bless her pointed little heart, never offered me a proper bed. She seemed to take real pride in telling me, "It's just temporary, Mabel," as if hospitality was a burden. I let her. Every temporary night on that sagging mattress only added fuel to my quiet fire. What nobody knew, what I guarded tighter than the cookie recipe I never shared, was that I'd been investing steadily since my 20s. Walter and I started with small things, a couple of government bonds, then later shares in a utilities company that most folks thought was boring. Boring is good. Boring pays out. While Walter fixed buses and I cataloged novels, our money was quietly pulling double shifts in the background. Later I branched out. I bought up a handful of storage units during one of those recessions when everyone else thought they were useless. Turns out people will pay a pretty penny to keep their extra furniture and boxes of yearbooks out of the rain. I turned a tidy profit without anyone ever noticing. Then there were antiques. I'd haunt estate sales, pick up cheap china or old radios, and sell them online to people who insisted they saw character in the scratches. To me it was just extra income, but it added up. By the time Walter's heart gave out, I had more commas in my accounts than most folks believe possible for a bus mechanic's widow. $61 million, give or take a market dip. $61 million. I could have bought my own private bookmobile if I wanted. But I didn't flaunt it, not even a little. I wore the same sensible shoes, drove the same old sedan, and listened as Derek explained that maybe I should consider senior housing, because money must be tight. He thought he was being practical. I thought it was a gift, another peek into who he'd become. So no, I never corrected them. Not Derek, not Corinne, not the neighbors who assumed I was clipping coupons until my fingers bled. I let them all believe the fiction. Because when people think you're broke, they stop pretending. They show you exactly what you mean to them without the cushion of dollar signs. And I wanted to see the truth laid out as plainly as a library card catalog. What I discovered in those years wasn't about numbers in a bank account. It was about character, mine, theirs, and the gap in between. And every penny of that hidden fortune became less about luxury and more about leverage. Over the next 4 years, Corinne became the unofficial queen of small humiliations. She had a way of handing me my place, the same way she handed out kale chips, crispy, smug, and never requested. Take dinners, for example. Everyone else got their portions on matching ceramic plates, the ones she bragged about finding during a boutique clearance sale. Mine, without fail, a scratched plastic bowl that had seen better decades. She'd plunk it down in front of me with a smile too tight to be polite. "Don't worry, Mabel, this way nothing breaks." Nothing breaks indeed, except dignity. I'd stir my portion with the wobbly plastic fork she remembered to set for me, all while Derek shoveled food into his mouth too fast to notice. Sometimes I'd tap the fork against the bowl, making a little drumbeat to amuse Owen. Humor kept me afloat, even when the broth in that plastic bowl tasted like pride watered down. Pictures were another battlefield. Corinne fancied herself something of a curator of aesthetic moments, and apparently my face didn't match the vibe. "Why don't you sit this one out, Mabel? It'll be more cohesive," she'd chirp while waving everyone else into frame. Cohesive. That word made me feel like a mismatched sock at the bottom of the laundry. I'd step aside, holding Owen's jacket or purse straps like a stagehand, while she snapped away. I used to joke that I was going to start charging an hourly rate for being the designated holder of other people's belongings. Nobody laughed but Owen. The exclusions weren't limited to pictures either. Holidays rolled around, and suddenly gatherings were trimmed down. "It might be too expensive for you, Mabel," Corinne would say with false sympathy, as if she was saving me from myself. She'd pat my arm, all gentle condescension, and inform me that perhaps this year it would just be the nuclear family. I was apparently radioactive waste, fit only for disposal. Meanwhile, they'd go off to ski lodges or wineries, and I'd receive a polite text afterward with a filtered photo of Owen bundled up like a marshmallow. But here's the thing. Through it all, Owen never bought into his mother's campaign. He was a 9-year-old with sticky hands and a big heart, and to him I was just Gran. Real enough. He'd climb into my lap, knees knocking against my cardigan buttons, and announce with the clarity only children have, "You're my Gran." That's real enough. He smelled of crayons, peanut butter, and salt air, and every time he said it, I felt both mended and torn apart at once. Corinne, of course, couldn't let those moments go unchallenged. She'd roll her eyes so hard I thought they'd get stuck, muttering about how kids say the darndest things. But I saw the flicker in her expression, the irritation that Owen's loyalty to me wasn't something she could airbrush out of a photo. Those years taught me how steady a child's love can be, even when adults are busy redrawing the family map. It nearly broke me, sitting there with a plastic bowl in my lap, knowing my grandson thought the world of me while his mother worked overtime to make me invisible. The eye rolls, the exclusions, the endless paper-thin kindnesses, they were all bricks in the wall Corinne thought she was building. What she didn't know was that I was keeping careful count of every single one. During that seaside cottage trip, they had planned a morning walk along the coastal trail. Normally, I kept up the act of being the frail old bird they believed I was. I'd sigh heavily, stop to rub my knees, and fuss about needing to catch my breath. Corinne loved those little performances. It made her feel generous when she slowed down for me. But this time I decided to drop the act. I set one foot in front of the other with purpose and matched their pace with ease. The path wound through sandy stretches, across weathered boardwalks, and out to tide pools where barnacles clung like stubborn tenants. Owen darted ahead, pointing out starfish and crabs, his energy spilling over like a soda shaken too long. "Gran, you're fast," he laughed, panting as he tried to keep up with me instead of the other way around. I grinned, not even winded. "Well, sweetheart, these old legs have a little more in them than people think." That made Derek chuckle nervously. Corinne, though, stopped mid-step and narrowed her eyes. She looked at me as though I just recited my lines wrong in a play she was directing. I wasn't playing the helpless mother-in-law anymore, and that unsettled her. She didn't say anything, but her expression was loud enough. I just kept walking, feeling the salty breeze lift my hair like a victory flag. By the time we got back to the cottage, Owen had a bucket full of shells and wet shoes, Derek was glued to his phone, and Corinne was fussing with her hair, convinced the humidity had conspired against her. That's when dinner came up. "I'm thinking we just order pizza," Derek mumbled, scrolling through local options. "It's easy. Or maybe burgers," Corinne added. "Less hassle." I cleared my throat and smiled sweetly. "Actually, I'd love to cook tonight. Proper meal." Corinne blinked, startled, then quickly recovered. "Oh, Mabel, that's really not necessary. The kitchen is tiny, and you might tire yourself out." Her tone was syrupy, but her eyes were calculating. "I insist," I replied, already knowing what I'd stashed in the fridge. Earlier that day, I'd slipped into town while they were distracted and visited a little specialty market. I picked up salmon fillets so fresh they practically smelled like the tide, a small jar of saffron that cost more than Corinne's entire yoga outfit, a bundle of herbs, and a bottle of Pinot that did not come from a cardboard box. When I laid everything out on the counters, Corinne's eyebrows nearly disappeared into her hairline. She busied herself pretending not to watch me while fussing with throw pillows that didn't need fussing. Derek offered a half-hearted, "Need help, Mom?" without actually moving from the couch. I waved him off. I chopped, sautéed, and stirred with a confidence that had been waiting 4 years to stretch its legs. The cottage filled with the smell of roasting salmon and saffron risotto, the kind of smell that clings to the air and makes everyone's stomachs growl. I even whipped up a salad with shaved fennel, lemon, and olive oil so smooth it almost qualified as silk. When I finally set the table, Owen's eyes went wide. "Gran, this looks like a feast." And he was right. It was a feast, one far beyond the budget I was supposed to have. I poured myself a glass of Pinot, smoothed my cardigan, and caught Corinne watching me from the corner of her eye. The suspicion on her face told me she knew something didn't add up. I just smiled. My little act of strength on the trail had been the opening act. This dinner? Oh, this was only the beginning of the main show. Dinner that night looked like something out of a glossy magazine, though the cottage table was too wobbly to be glamorous. I laid out the roasted salmon on a platter, the risotto glowing golden from saffron, the fennel salad dressed and crisp, and a chocolate tart I'd hidden away for dessert. The kitchen smelled like a restaurant you'd have to wait 6 months to get into. Derek sat down first, barely glancing up from his phone until the plate hit the table. He forked a bite, chewed, and suddenly froze mid-motion. His eyes widened as though I'd pulled a rabbit out of a hat. "Mom, this is incredible. Since when do you cook like this?" I sipped my Pinot, trying not to smirk. "Since forever. You just never noticed." Owen was happily chewing, oblivious to the adult undercurrents, humming through his bites like dinner was a personal concert. "Best fish ever, Gran," he declared between mouthfuls. That boy could make anyone feel like a Michelin-starred chef. Corinne, on the other hand, didn't look pleased. She poked at her salmon with suspicion rather than appreciation. Her nose twitched the way it did when something didn't fit her carefully curated world. After a few silent bites, she set her fork down. "These ingredients weren't cheap, Mabel. Where did you get them?" Her voice was calm, but her eyes were sharp as needles. I let the question hang for a beat, then reached for my slim laptop resting on the sideboard. I'd brought it with me knowing this exact moment would come. With deliberate calm, I opened it, clicked to a tidy folder labeled Household, and spun it around so they could see. The screen displayed numbers most people only imagine. Balances with more zeros than a dartboard, lists of properties spread across states, endowment summaries laid out as neatly as library shelves. I watched Derek's fork clatter onto his plate. His jaw moved, but words struggled to keep up. "Is this real?" he finally managed to stammer, his face drained of color. "Realer than the way you've treated me," I replied evenly. My voice carried no anger, just truth polished smooth by years of waiting. "This was a test. A 4-year test. And you failed spectacularly." Silence followed, broken only by Owen asking for more risotto. He didn't care about numbers on a screen. He cared about whether there was enough food to build a mountain on his plate. Corinne's face, however, drained of its practiced composure. Her hand trembled as she lifted her wine glass. The stem slipped from her grip, and the glass shattered on the wooden floor, red pooling like spilled paint. Without a word, she pushed her chair back so hard it scraped, stumbled to the door, and rushed outside. Through the thin cottage walls, I could hear her ragged breaths, gasping like a woman who just discovered the ground wasn't where she thought it was. Derek half rose, uncertain whether to follow or to stare at the glowing screen. He looked back and forth between me and the laptop as though trying to reconcile the two images. His lips parted, but nothing came out. Meanwhile, I calmly lifted my glass of Pinot and took a slow sip, letting the richness linger on my tongue. 4 years of performance had led to this moment. While Corinne gasped for air on the porch and Derek sat paralyzed, I felt no panic, no rush of regret. I only felt the deep, satisfying calm of someone who'd finally turned the last page of a long, patient story. Corinne came back from the porch pale as the moon, shoulders drawn up like a coat she couldn't shrug off. I had already blotted the wine with a dish towel and folded it into a tidy square for later scolding with club soda. Then I set a manila folder on the wobbly cottage table with the ceremony of a librarian placing a rare book on the checkout desk. "Before anyone panics about salmon and saffron," I said, "we're going to talk about structure. If there's one thing I know, it's shelving systems." I patted the folder. "This is our new catalog." Inside were documents with cheerful tabs, blue for estate, green for trusts, yellow for contingencies, and pink for signatures because life can use a little color when numbers make you dizzy. My lawyer Amira Patel swears tabs lower blood pressure. Judging by Derek's face, we'd need a rainbow. "My estate will go into a trust for Owen until he turns 26. I began. "Not a piggy jar, not a rainy day shoebox. A A trust with rules and professionals watching the gate. Derek cleared his throat like a man allergic to accountability. Who exactly manages all this? Trustees will be Amira and an independent firm that doesn't share holidays with us, I said. No family withdrawals, no creative math, no just this once. We will not be running bake sale finances on a battleship. Corinne wrapped her arms around herself, posture perfect but voice thin. And where does that leave us? With fewer spreadsheets and more time to hydrate, I said, which made Owen grin into his water glass. There is, however, a condition, and I want it printed large enough to read from space. If either of you tries to poison my relationship with Owen again, through careful exclusions, downgraded invitations, or language that turns love into a coupon, the money diverts to charities, literacy programs, public transit funds, food banks. Every dollar will find someone who understands what family means. The cottage ticked and sighed, and somewhere beyond the dunes a buoy bell rang like a period at the end of a firm sentence. Derek stared at the tabs as though they might rearrange themselves into a happier paragraph. I'm also moving, I said, sliding out a crisp deed. A house 90 minutes away. Close enough for Sunday visits, far enough to require intention and a full tank. I want company chosen on purpose, not out of habit. Owen looked up quickly. Does your new place have a porch? 2, I said. And a bird feeder guaranteed to scandalize squirrels. He relaxed, the uncomplicated way children do when they hear the word porch. Corinne finally spoke, a paper scrap of sound. This is blackmail. No, I said, gentle but with the spine of a hardback. This is consequence. Derek rubbed his forehead. Mom, do we get a say? You always did, I answered. For 4 years you told me with choices, not words. This folder is me replying in the same language. I nudged a pen toward the edge of the table. Read. Ask questions. But understand, these aren't threats, they're boundaries. Boundaries keep grown-ups from tripping over the same rug forever. The tide kept breathing. The Pinot in my glass caught a little moonlight. I felt steady, not triumphant, organized, not cruel. A good filing system can do that for a person. The next morning the cottage was hushed, except for the gulls making their usual racket. The air still smelled faintly of last night's feast, lemon, herbs, and a hint of char that clung to the curtains. I was on the porch with my first cup of coffee, letting the steam warm my face, when Derek appeared in the doorway. He looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His hair stuck out in odd directions, his eyes were ringed with shadows, and his posture slumped in a way that reminded me of Walter coming home after a double shift. He stepped outside and sat down heavily on the creaky chair beside me. We'll accept your terms, he said, voice hoarse, like he'd been arguing with himself all night. I took a long sip of coffee before answering. Acceptance isn't the same as character, Derek. He flinched a little but didn't look away. His lips trembled, and I saw the boy he used to be. The one who cried when his goldfish died and who once apologized to a tree for breaking a branch during backyard baseball. His eyes welled up now, tears clinging stubbornly to the edges. I failed you, Mom. I let Corinne push you out. I let my own son think that love depended on money or on appearances. I stood back and told myself it was easier that way. I set my mug down and leaned back. You failed yourself, Derek, I said softly. I already knew who I was. You forgot who you were. And now you have to prove you remember, not with apologies but with actions. Apologies are easy. Actions take practice. He pressed his hands to his face and exhaled, shoulders shaking. For a moment I thought he might crumple right there on the porch, and I wanted to comfort him, but I kept my hands in my lap. It wasn't time for comfort yet. It was time for him to sit in the truth. The screen door creaked open then, and a small figure padded out. Owen, hair sticking up like a startled chick, rubbing his eyes with balled fists. His pajama pants were twisted from a night of restless turning. Gran, he mumbled, voice thick with mourning. Are we gonna explore more tide pools today? The timing nearly broke me. I opened my arms and he crawled straight into my lap, all warm limbs and sleepy weight. I hugged him so tightly I thought my ribs might crack. His little body smelled of salt and cereal, and I could feel his heart thumping steady against me. Of course, sweetheart, I whispered into his hair. We'll find more crabs, more shells, And maybe even a starfish if we're lucky. Derek watched us, his face crumpling again. But this time there was something different in his eyes. Something raw, like a man finally realizing the cost of standing by too long. I didn't say anything more. The waves filled the silence, rolling in and out like they'd been doing long before any of us arrived. It was a new morning, bright but brittle. The kind where everything feels possible but nothing is guaranteed. Derek had confessed. Owen had reminded me of what was worth fighting for. And I sat there on that porch holding both the weight and the hope of my family in my arms. 6 months later, I had settled into my new home like a book finally placed on the right shelf. The house sat on a gentle hill with big sunny windows that caught the morning light just so. Out back, I had an herb garden lined with clay pots, basil, rosemary, thyme, and a stubborn sage plant that refused to grow evenly no matter how much coaxing I gave it. A row of bird feeders hung along the porch rail, and everyday chickadees, cardinals, and the occasional pushy squirrel held conventions out there like I'd opened a diner with free coffee. I'd sip tea and watch them argue over seeds, chuckling at the drama of it all. Derek started visiting every other weekend like clockwork. He'd arrive looking both eager and hesitant, the way a man approaches a house where he knows the welcome mat is out but he's not sure if the lock has changed. Sometimes he brought Corinne. She was careful now, polite, cautious, her words smoothed over like she was afraid of splinters. Never warm, though. And that was fine by me. I didn't need warmth from her anymore. Respect was enough, and I finally had it. Oh, and bless that boy, thrived in this new rhythm. He'd storm through the house like a conductor laying down tracks, his model trains weaving across the living room floor, up onto the couch cushions and back down again. When we weren't building railroads, he was in the kitchen helping me water the basil, his small hands holding the can with serious concentration. "Gran, don't forget the little ones," he'd remind me, as if I'd somehow miss a pot right under my nose. One afternoon, while arranging his trains in what he proudly called the longest line in history, Owen paused and looked up at me with the kind of seriousness children save for questions that matter. "Gran," he said, "Mom says you're rich. Does that change anything?" I set down the book I'd been pretending to read and smiled. "Not between us, sweetheart. Money buys choices, not character." He thought about that, his brow furrowed like he was solving a great mystery. Then he nodded, solemn as a judge. "So I can go to any college? If you work hard," I told him, brushing a curl from his forehead. "The door will be open. You'll have the key, but you still have to turn it yourself." He grinned at that, satisfied, and returned to his trains, humming a little tune only he seemed to know. As I sat there, the scent of basil drifting through the open window and the sound of birds squabbling outside, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. I had reclaimed my dignity. I'd taught my family, both directly and through boundaries, that respect wasn't optional. And most importantly, I had made sure my grandson understood something priceless. Money doesn't change who you are. It simply reveals who everyone else really is. I leaned back in my chair, the sun warm on my shoulders, and thought, this chapter of my life is mine on my terms, written in ink that no one else gets to erase.
Share your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Derek truly deserves a second chance, or is respect too little, too late? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.